He is your brother.
He is my son. And you stand there, looking at him as if he were nothing more than a thief at the door. Let me tell you, your cold-blooded greed is a far greater sin than any secret I have ever kept. My voice, usually so soft, rang through the tense silence of my living room, trembling with a righteous fury I hadn't felt in decades. Before me stood my 10 children, a jury of cold, unforgiving faces. David's eyes were narrowed with calculation. Eleanor's mouth was a thin line of disapproval. Samuel's face was a mask of sour resentment. And beside me, standing with a quiet, wounded dignity, was the cause of it all, James. A man with Arthur's kind eyes and a jawline that belonged to a ghost from my distant past. A stranger to them, but to me, he was my firstborn, my secret, my shame and my salvation, all standing in a worn tweed jacket, utterly alone in a room full of his own blood. My dearest friend, have you ever carried a secret so heavy it reshaped the very landscape of your soul? A truth you kept hidden not out of malice, but out of fear and a desperate, misguided love. If you understand that weight, then you will understand the journey I am about to share. Please, stay with me. If my story finds a place in your heart, grant it a like and subscribe to my channel. I so love to read your comments and learn from which city you are joining our little community. It makes the world feel a little less lonely. Before I was Mary, Arthur's wife, mother of 10, I was just Mary, a girl of 18 with a heart full of impossible dreams and a love so fierce it was destined to burn. His name was Thomas. He had hair the color of corn silk and a smile that could coax the sun from behind the clouds. He was the son of a migrant farmhand, and I was the daughter of a small-town shop owner. In the rigid world of the 1960s, we might as well have been from different planets. Our love was a thing of stolen moments, hurried whispers behind the bleachers at a high school football game, hands clasped in the darkness of the local cinema, promises made under a canopy of summer stars down by the creek. He promised me the world. He was going to join the army, he said, see the world and come back a man my father would have to respect. He was going to build me a house with a porch swing where we could grow old. He left in the autumn. His letters, full of the dust of a Texas training camp and a young man's bravado, were my lifeline. Then, the letters started coming from a place called Vietnam. They became less frequent, the bravado replaced by a weariness that frightened me. And then, one cold spring morning, a different kind of letter arrived. It was not in his familiar scroll. It was an official envelope with a black, unforgiving stamp. Thomas was gone, lost to a jungle half a world away. My world ended, but a new life, a terrifying secret, was just beginning inside of me. To be an unwed mother in that town, in that time, was to be a pariah. It was a sentence of shame for both me and the innocent child I carried. My parents, heartbroken and terrified of the scandal, arranged for me to go away to a boarding house for young women in another state. It was a clean, sterile, silent place, full of girls like me with frightened eyes and burgeoning bellies. I gave birth to a healthy baby boy on a cold November morning. They let me hold him for 1 hour. One perfect, heartbreaking, 60-minute eternity. He was beautiful, with a fuzz of golden hair just like his father's. I wrapped him in the little blue blanket I had secretly knitted. I kissed his forehead and let a single tear, the only one I allowed myself to shed, fall onto his cheek. I whispered his father's name to him, and my own, so he would hear them at least once. I wasn't abandoning my son. I was trying to save him from a life that would begin with the stain of my shame. The papers I signed felt like they were written on my own skin, scarring me forever. I went home empty-armed, with a secret that would become the silent, ever-present ghost in my life. A year later, I met Arthur. He was a good, kind, steady man, and his love was a gentle balm on my wounded soul. I never told him. I was too afraid. Afraid he would see me as sullied, as a liar. Our life together was beautiful, blessed with 10 wonderful children. But every November, a private, secret winter would descend upon my heart. Every time I looked at my sons, I would wonder about the one I'd lost. Life went on. The secret grew fainter, a dull ache where a sharp wound had once been. Until last month, it was a Tuesday. I was collecting the mail, just like any other day. Among the bills and the catalogs was a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name and address written in an unfamiliar, steady hand. There was no return address. A strange premonition, cold and sharp, went through me. I sat at my kitchen table, my hands trembling as I slid a butter knife under the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and a photograph. The letter began, "Dear Ms. Mary, my name is James, and I believe you may be my birth mother." The world stopped. 60 years of carefully constructed peace shattered into a million pieces. The letter was kind, gentle. He explained his adoptive parents had passed away peacefully years ago, after a wonderful life. They had told him the truth on his 18th birthday and given him the little blue blanket they'd found him wrapped in. It was all he had. He wasn't asking for anything, he wrote. No money, no relationship. He just wanted to see the face of the woman who gave him life, to know where his father's golden hair came from. My eyes fell to the photograph. It was of a man in his early 60s with kind, smiling eyes. Arthur's eyes, I thought, with a jolt. But the set of his jaw, the shape of his face, that belonged to Thomas. He was standing in front of a modest-looking house, a friendly-faced dog at his side. He looked like a good man, a happy man. I held the letter and the photograph, my 60-year-old secret alive and breathing in my hands. The ghost I had lived with for my entire adult life now had a name and a face, and he was asking to see me. For 3 days, the letter and the photograph sat at the bottom of my sewing basket, hidden beneath spools of thread and scraps of old fabric. I tried to go on as if nothing had happened. I baked a lemon drizzle cake for the church bake sale. I spent an afternoon on my hands and knees in the garden, pulling weeds with a ferocity that bordered on anger. I tried to bury the letter under the weight of my daily routine, hoping it would simply disappear. But it was a futile effort. The secret, now awakened, was a constant humming presence in my quiet house. Every glance at a photo of my children sent a pang of guilt through me. Every time I sat in Arthur's chair, I felt like a fraud. I had built a life, a family, on a foundation that was missing its very first cornerstone. The fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in my stomach. What would this do to them? To David's obsession with the family's finances and legacy, to Eleanor's carefully curated image of our perfect, respectable family. They would see James not as a brother, but as a threat, a complication, a stain on their history. On the third night, I couldn't sleep. I came downstairs in the dark, the moonlight casting long shadows across the living room floor. I sank into Arthur's chair, the worn fabric seeming to hold the faint, comforting scent of him. I closed my eyes and spoke to him, as I so often did in the quiet of the night. "Oh, Arthur," I whispered into the darkness. "What am I to do?" "I was so young, so afraid. I kept this from you, my love, and that is a shame I will carry to my grave. But he has found me. My son. He has a good face, a kind face. To turn him away now feels like a cruelty beyond measure. Would you have hated me for what I did? For the secret I kept?" I sat in the silence, listening to the house settle around me. And in the quiet chambers of my own heart, I found Arthur's answer. I knew, with a certainty that was as real as his hand in mine, that his love had been big enough for all of me, even the parts I had been too ashamed to show him. He would not have seen shame. He would have seen a young, scared girl who had made a heartbreaking choice. He would have opened his arms and his heart, and he would have said, "Then our family is one son bigger than we thought." To deny James now, out of fear of what our other children might think, would be the real betrayal. It would be a betrayal of the compassionate man Arthur had been, and a betrayal of the boy I had given away in an act of desperate love. The next morning, my fear was gone, replaced by a trembling, fragile resolve. I took the letter from the sewing basket. My hands were steady as I picked up the phone and dialed the number he had written at the bottom of the page. A man's voice, calm and warm, answered on the second ring.
"Hello?"
My own voice was a reedy whisper.
"James, my name
is Mary. I received your letter." There was a silence on the other end of the line, a silence so profound I could hear the sound of his soft, steady breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with an emotion he was trying to control. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for calling me. We decided to meet. Not at my home, not at his. A neutral place. A small park in a town halfway between us, a place of no memories, where we could begin to create one." A week later, I was sitting on a park bench, the autumn leaves skittering across the pavement around my feet. I saw him walking toward me from across the lawn, and the 60 years that separated us collapsed in a single heart-stopping moment. He had the same loping, easy gait as Thomas, the same golden glints in his hair when the sun hit it just right. but the eyes that met mine as he drew closer, they were my own. He sat down on the bench, leaving a respectful distance between us. We were two strangers, bound by the most intimate connection on earth. He was the first to speak. "You look just like the photo I have of my grandmother," he said with a small, shy smile. "My adoptive mother gave it to me. It was all she had." And then he reached into the canvas bag beside him and pulled out a small, faded, impossibly familiar object, a little blue blanket. "She kept this too," he said, his voice catching. Tears streamed down my face as I reached out and touched the soft, worn wool I had knitted in a lonely room a lifetime ago. The conversation, so awkward at first, began to flow. I told him about Thomas, his father, a boy who had promised me a porch swing and the world. I pulled a tiny, cracked photograph of him from my wallet, the only one I had, and gave it to James. He told me about his life, his job as a high school history teacher, his late wife, his 2 grown daughters. He was a good man, a kind man. I saw it in the way he spoke of his students, in the gentle sadness in his eyes when he mentioned his wife. He had not come looking for money or an inheritance. He had not come to disrupt my life. He had come looking for the first chapter of his own story. And as we sat on that bench under the golden autumn sun, I gave it to him. When it was time to go, he stood and looked at me, a lifetime of unspoken questions in his eyes. Can we do this again?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Yes, my son. We can." I drove home in a daze, a whirlwind of joy and grief and a profound, bone-deep relief. The secret was no longer just mine. The ghost had a name and he had my eyes. But as the miles passed, a new cold feeling began to creep in, chilling the warmth in my heart. The easiest part was over. Now came the hardest part of all, the truth. And I had no idea if the family I had built was strong enough to survive it. For the next 2 months, I lived a double life. Outwardly, I was Mary, the matriarch, tending my garden and hosting my smaller, more peaceful Sunday gatherings with Benjamin, Jessica, and their families. But inwardly, I was a young girl again, giddy with a secret, wonderful knowledge. James and I met every Tuesday. It became our sacred ritual. We'd find a different quiet town, a different anonymous cafe, and we would talk for hours, trying to stitch together the 60 years of blank pages that lay between us. I learned about his daughters, Olivia and Sophie, my granddaughters, both of them teachers like their father. He showed me pictures, and I wept at the sight of these 2 intelligent, beautiful women whose lives I had missed entirely. In return, I gave him the family he never knew. I told him stories about his half-siblings, focusing on their childhoods, on the good and funny things, trying to paint a portrait of the family he belonged to, even if they didn't know it yet. He was a wonderful listener, his kind eyes full of a deep scholarly curiosity and a quiet empathy. He never once expressed a word of bitterness or resentment for the life he could have had. He was simply grateful for the one he was given, but the secrecy began to wear on me. I felt a familiar dishonesty creeping back into my heart, the same shame I had carried after lying to Arthur. When I was with James, I felt a pang of guilt for hiding him from my other children. When I was with my other children, I felt a terrible guilt for hiding my firstborn from them. I was living a fractured life, and my heart could not bear to be split in 2. The breaking point came as Thanksgiving approached. The thought of sitting at a large table, surrounded by a portion of my family, while my firstborn son ate a solitary meal in his own home 100 miles away, was simply unbearable. It felt like a betrayal of the highest order, a fresh abandonment. "I have to tell them," I told James one Tuesday, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. "I cannot live like this. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to them, whatever their reaction may be." James reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "I understand," he said softly. "Whatever you decide, Mary, and whatever happens, I want you to know that these last 2 months have been the greatest gift of my life. Finding you is enough." His grace and understanding only solidified my resolve. But I was not the naive woman I had once been. After the ordeal with the nursing home, I knew that revealing this truth to all 10 of them at once would be like throwing a lit match into a room full of dynamite. David would scream about the inheritance. Eleanor would hyperventilate over the scandal. I needed a plan. I needed my allies. I called Jessica and Sarah and asked them to come for tea on a Thursday afternoon, making it clear that it was urgent and private. They arrived looking concerned, and I led them to the kitchen table, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "My dears," I began, my voice trembling as I finally gave voice to the secret I had held for a lifetime. "There is something I have to tell you. Something that happened a very, very long time ago before I ever met Arthur." I told them everything. About Thomas and the war, about the shame and the fear, about the little blue blanket and the single hour I was allowed to hold my son. I told them about the letter, the secret meetings, and the kind, wonderful man my son had become. When I was finished, I pushed the photo of James across the table towards them. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my own shaky breaths. I had braced myself for shock, perhaps even a hint of judgment. But what I received was a wave of pure, uncomplicated compassion that brought fresh tears to my eyes. Sarah's eyes were full of tears. Jessica simply reached out and took my hand, her grip firm and strong. "Oh, Mary," Sarah whispered, her voice full of awe, "to have carried that all by yourself for all these years. What you must have gone through." Jessica studied the photograph of James, her expression thoughtful. "He has your eyes," she said softly. Then she looked up at me, her mind already shifting from emotion to strategy. "Okay," she said. "So this is an earthquake. But you have done nothing wrong. The fear you're feeling now is all about the reaction of the others, isn't it?" I nodded, unable to speak. "David will go straight to the lawyers," Jessica said, thinking aloud. "He'll be convinced James is a grifter who's after the inheritance. Eleanor will be mortified. This story doesn't fit into her narrative of the perfect Vance family. She will try to bury it. So what do? I pleaded. "How do I tell them?" "Not all at once," Jessica said firmly. "We have to build a base of support first. We start with the ones who have the softest hearts. We start with Benjamin. And Catherine," Sarah added. "Catherine was my second daughter, a pediatric nurse with a pragmatic but deeply empathetic soul. She's level-headed. She won't fly off the handle like Eleanor." The plan began to form. We would hold a small private meeting. Just me, Benjamin and Sarah, Catherine and Jessica and Samuel. Samuel would be a risk, but Jessica was confident she could manage him if he was outnumbered by compassionate voices. I would tell them the truth, and I would have my staunchest allies in the room with me. We would build a coalition of the willing before we ever faced the dragons. I felt a profound sense of relief. The burden was no longer mine alone to carry. I had my daughters-in-law, my wise and loyal counselors by my side. As they left that evening, Jessica paused at the door. "You are the bravest woman I know, Mary," she said. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. But as I closed the door, I knew I was no longer alone in my fear. With my small army beside me, I prepared to introduce my family to a 60-year-old secret, praying that the love we had built would be strong enough, in some of them at least, to withstand the coming earthquake. We chose the following Saturday for the meeting. It was a cold, gray afternoon, the sky outside matching the anxious pallor of my own heart. I arranged the chairs in the living room in a small, tight circle, a visual plea for intimacy and understanding. Jessica and Sarah arrived early, their presence a silent, steadying force. They made a pot of tea while I paced the floor, clutching the letter from James and the small, worn photograph of Thomas in my hand. Benjamin was the first of my children to arrive, his artist's eyes wide with a nervous energy. He knew this was something significant, something that would shift the foundations of our world. He hugged me tightly, whispering, "Well, whatever it is, Mom, it's okay." Catherine, my daughter the nurse, came next. She was, as always, a picture of calm competence. She assessed the room, the tense set of my shoulders, the presence of my two most loyal daughters-in-law, and her expression softened with a professional empathy. She took my hand and gave it a firm, reassuring squeeze. Samuel was the last to arrive, pulled along by Jessica like a ship being reluctantly towed into harbor. His face was a thundercloud of resentment. He slumped into an armchair in the corner, crossing his arms over his chest, a clear signal that he was a hostile witness. When they were all settled, a heavy silence fell over the room. I took a deep breath, the faded photograph of Thomas cool against my palm. "I have asked you four here today," I began, my voice trembling only slightly. "Because I believe of all my children, you have the kindest and most understanding hearts. What I am about to tell you is the deepest secret of my life. I have carried it alone for 60 years, and I cannot carry it alone any longer. I told them everything. I spoke of a world that no longer exists, of the crushing shame of a young, unmarried girl who found herself pregnant and alone. I spoke of a boy named Thomas, of his golden hair and his promises, and of the official, heartless letter that had stolen him from me. I described the cold, silent home where my son was born, and the single, perfect hour I was allowed to be his mother before I signed him away forever, believing it was my only act of love. As I spoke, the room was utterly still. Benjamin was openly weeping, his face buried in his hands. Sarah had her arm around him, her own eyes wet with tears. Catherine sat forward in her chair, her nurse's face full of a profound, focused compassion, as if she were listening to the history of a patient's deepest trauma. Even Samuel's rigid posture had softened slightly, his scowl replaced by a look of stunned confusion. When my story was finished, I unfolded the letter from James and placed it, along with his photograph, on the coffee table. "A few months ago," I said, my voice now a whisper, "he found me. He is a good man, a kind man. He is a history teacher. His name is James, and he is my son." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was Benjamin's quiet sobs. Catherine was the first to break the silence. She rose from her chair, came to me, and knelt on the floor, taking both of my hands in hers. "Oh, Mother," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "to have carried that burden, all alone, for all these years. I am so sorry you had to go through that by yourself." There was no judgment in her eyes, only love. My heart, which had been clenched in a knot of fear, loosened just a little. But then Samuel spoke from his corner, his voice jarring and suspicious. "So wait a minute. How do you know this is for real? How do you know this guy isn't some con artist who found out about our family and cooked up this story?" Jessica shot him a look of pure fury. "Samuel!" "My God, your mother just tore her own heart open for you, and that is your first question?" "It's a logical question," he snapped back, his envy and suspicion immediately overriding any flicker of compassion. "This James shows up out of nowhere after 60 years? Right when Mom is getting older? It smells like money to me. What does he want?" "He wants nothing," I said, my voice rising with a protective fire I didn't know I had. "He wants nothing but the truth of who he is, a truth I denied him for his entire life." "Samuel, that's enough," Catherine said, her voice sharp with a clinical authority that even he couldn't ignore. "This isn't about money. This is about our mother. This is about a brother we never knew. He is not my brother," Samuel spat, getting to his feet. "He is a stranger with a story. I don't believe it, and I don't want any part of this. You are all being played for fools. The only fool in this room, Samuel, is the one whose heart is so small and so bitter he can't see the truth when it's laid at his feet," Jessica said, her voice dangerously quiet. Samuel looked at his wife, then at the rest of us, a circle of faces united against his cold suspicion. He saw he was outnumbered. With a curse under his breath, he turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the front door behind him. The sound echoed the one David had made weeks before. It was the sound of a heart closing. The 5 of us who remained sat in the aftermath, the beautiful, fragile moment of truth now tainted by Samuel's ugly rejection. I was relieved, so profoundly relieved, to be surrounded by the love of 3 of my children and my 2 dear daughters-in-law. But I knew with a cold, sinking dread that the sound of that slamming door was the first drumbeat of the war to come. Samuel would go straight to David and Eleanor. And the dragons, now awakened, would soon be coming for us all. The 5 of us sat in the quiet aftermath of Samuel's departure, the echo of the slammed door still hanging in the air. The relief of the truth being told was now mingled with the cold certainty of the coming storm. Catherine, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak, her voice cutting through the emotional haze. "All right," she said, her tone shifting from that of a daughter to a charge nurse assessing a critical situation. "That was ugly, but now we know where we stand. Samuel will have called David before he even reached the end of the street. David will call his lawyer, and Eleanor will start her whispering campaign. We can't just sit here and wait for the tidal wave to hit us. We need a plan." "What kind of plan?" Benjamin asked, his face pale. The emotional upheaval had clearly shaken him. "We need to get ahead of their narrative," Jessica said, her strategic mind already working. "Right now to them, James is a ghost story, a faceless threat they can paint as a monster. We need to make him real. They need to hear it from you, from people they can't dismiss. She looked at Benjamin and Catherine. You need to meet him. A look of fear and wonder passed between my two children. Meet him. Meet this brother who had an hour ago been a complete secret. Yes, Catherine said after a moment, her voice firm. She's right. We can't defend a man we've never met. Mother, would he be willing? He is a kind and gentle man, I assured them. All he has ever wanted is the truth. We decided then and there. I would call James and ask him to come to our house the following afternoon. For the first time, he would cross the threshold not as a secret, but as a son. But David and Eleanor moved faster than we anticipated. The wave didn't just come, it crashed down upon us. 2 days later, a courier delivered a stiff cream-colored envelope to my door. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, one with a long, important-sounding name full of partners. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was not addressed to me in a familiar way. It began, Dear Mrs. Vance. It was a formal notice. It stated that the firm represented the interests of the estate of Arthur Vance, specifically on behalf of Mr. David Vance and Mrs. Eleanor Vance Smythe. It went on to say that they had been made aware of a potential fraudulent claim being made by an unknown individual, and that they had reason to believe I was being subjected to undue influence, consistent with a person of advanced age. The words leapt off the page, cold and venomous. Fraudulent claim, undue influence, advanced age. They were Eleanor's cruel whispers and David's legal bullying, weaponized and stamped with official letterhead. The letter concluded by demanding I cease all contact with the individual in question, pending a full investigation, and warned that any failure to do so could result in legal proceedings to establish a conservatorship to protect my assets and my person. I dropped the letter as if it had burned my hands. A conservatorship. They were threatening to have me declared incompetent. It was the nursing home all over again, but this time they had brought lawyers. I felt a terror so profound it left me breathless. They were trying to strip me not just of my home, but of my own mind, my own will. I immediately called Catherine. They've sent a letter, I choked out. A lawyer's letter. They're saying I'm senile. I'm on my way, she said, her voice a blade of steel. Don't you dare believe a word of it. An hour later, my small war council was reassembled around my kitchen table. I sat shaken while Catherine, Jessica, and Sarah read the letter. This is disgusting, Sarah said, her gentle face hard with anger. It's a classic scare tactic, Catherine added, pushing her reading glasses up her nose. A legal bluff. They have no grounds for a competency hearing, Mother, and they know it. You are as sharp as a tack. This is designed to frighten you into abandoning James. And it proves our point, Jessica said, tapping the letter. They don't care about the truth. They don't even want to hear it. They went straight for the nuclear option, which means we can't back down. We have to do the opposite. We have to accelerate. And so the meeting with James took on a new, urgent significance. It was no longer just a family introduction. It was an act of defiance. That afternoon he arrived. I watched from the window as his modest sedan pulled up. He got out, holding a small bouquet of daisies, and looked up at the house with an expression of awe and trepidation. This was the home his father had dreamed of, the home he had never known. I opened the door before he could knock. Behind me, Catherine and Benjamin stood waiting, their faces a mixture of nervousness and intense curiosity. James, I said, my voice thick with all the history and emotion of the moment. Welcome home. I led him into the living room, into the circle of his family. My son, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I would like you to meet your sister Catherine. And your brother Benjamin. James looked at them, his kind, intelligent eyes moving from one face to the other. He seemed overwhelmed, and all he could manage was a soft, humble, "It's an honor." There was an awkward, heart-stopping silence. And then Catherine, my practical, wonderful Catherine, stepped forward and did what she does best. She healed. She opened her arms and embraced the brother she had never known. Benjamin, tears streaming down his face, followed suit. We sat for hours, the threatening letter forgotten on the table. They didn't treat him like a suspect. They treated him like a long-lost treasure. Catherine asked about his daughters. Benjamin, the artist, was fascinated by the way James's hands were shaped just like our father's. James, for his part, was gentle and unassuming, answering their questions with a quiet grace. He was not the con man from David's imagination. He was just family, As the afternoon sun faded, I looked at the three of them sitting together on the sofa, a 60-year-old secret now a living, breathing reality. I saw three of my children, united in a bond that had survived decades of silence. The dragons had sent their threat, trying to isolate and terrify me. But instead, they had only succeeded in forging a new, stronger, and truer family, right here in the heart of my home. The war was far from over, but for the first time, I truly believed we could win it. The warmth of that first true family meeting with James carried us through the next few days, a small bright fire against the encroaching chill of David and Eleanor's threat. The lawyer's letter sat on my mantelpiece, a venomous snake coiled in plain sight. We refused to let it frighten us back into the shadows. "We can't just ignore it," Catherine said during our next war council, her voice crisp and professional. "They've made a formal legal threat. We need to give them a formal legal response. We need our own lawyer. Not a shark like David's," Benjamin added, shuddering slightly at the thought. "Someone decent." "I know someone," Catherine said, a thoughtful look on her face. "A woman I've worked with on some elder abuse cases at the hospital. Her name is Evelyn Reed. She's not a shark. She's a lioness." 2 days later, 4 of us, myself, James, Catherine, and Jessica, were sitting in the calm, book-lined office of Evelyn Reed. She was a woman in her 50s with intelligent, compassionate eyes and an air of unshakable calm. I told my story for what felt like the 100th time, but for the first time, I told it without fear. I spoke of Thomas, of the adoption, of the letter, and of the kind man my son had become. James sat quietly beside me, his presence more powerful than any testimony. Then I handed Ms. Reed the letter from David's lawyers. She read it slowly, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she took off her glasses and looked at me, a small, reassuring smile playing on her lips. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice both gentle and firm. "This letter is 90% bluff and 10% bullying. A conservatorship proceeding is a drastic measure, and from what you've told me and from what I can see with my own eyes, they don't have a leg to stand on. They are trying to scare you into submission because they know, on the facts, they would lose." A collective sigh of relief went through our little group. "So, we fight back?" Jessica asked. "We don't just fight back," Ms. Reed said, a glint in her eye. "We dismantle their entire position. We'll use a two-pronged approach, legal and personal." She explained the legal prong first. She would draft a response so firm it would make their corporate lawyers' heads spin. It would state unequivocally that I was of sound mind and body, that I was now represented by counsel, and that James was my acknowledged biological son. It would also state that any further attempts to intimidate, harass, or pursue a baseless conservatorship would be met with a countersuit for elder abuse and intentional infliction of emotional distress. "We will," she concluded with a grim satisfaction, "put them squarely on the defensive." Then she leaned forward, her expression serious. "But the legal side is only half the battle. The other half is personal. Right now, David and Eleanor rule this family through fear and intimidation. They count on the other siblings to be too scared or too apathetic to challenge them. You must take that power away from them." Her gaze fell on Catherine. "You and your brother," she said, nodding toward where Benjamin would have been, "need to start a truth campaign. You must personally contact your other siblings, the ones who are not yet in this room. You will tell them the story. You will tell them you have met James. You will tell them he is a good man, and that for the first time in 60 years, your mother is not hiding a painful secret, but is embracing a newfound joy. You must force them to make a choice. Believe the sister they've known their whole life, or believe the lies of the 2 people who tried to put their own mother in a nursing home." The plan was brilliant. It was terrifying. It was exactly what we needed to do. That night, the campaign began. Catherine, with her calm, authoritative manner, took the lead. I sat in my kitchen listening as she made the first call to her younger sister, Margaret, a quiet school teacher who had always tried to stay out of the family squabbles. "Margaret, it's Catherine," she began. "I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to do so with an open heart. What Eleanor and David are telling you about Mom is not true." I could hear the faint, tinny sound of Margaret's confused protest through the phone. "No. You listen to me," Catherine insisted, her voice kind but unyielding. "I am your sister. I am a nurse, and I am telling you I sat in a room with this man today. He is our brother. He has our grandmother's smile. He is a kind, gentle soul who wants nothing from us, Mom is not being manipulated. She is healing from a wound she has carried since before any of us were born. You have a choice to make. You can believe the bullies who are threatening to have their own mother declared incompetent, or you can believe me." She hung up, her face looking drained but determined. "The seed is planted," she said, looking at me. "Now we see if it grows in barren soil, or if there is still some good earth left in this family." The lawyer's letter was in the mail. The first phone call had been made. For 60 years, my secret had been a thing of silence and shadows. Now, it was a truth that was marching into the light, and it would force every last one of my children to show their true colors. The days following the dispatch of Ms. Reed's letter were eerily quiet. It was the silence of a battlefield between volleys, a tense, breathless waiting. The Truth Campaign, as we had called it, was having a slow underground effect. The solid wall of opposition that David and Eleanor had built was beginning to show hairline fractures. The first crack appeared when my daughter Margaret called. Her voice was a wavering, uncertain thing, stretched thin between two warring factions. "Mother?" "It's me," she began, her hesitation palpable. "Catherine called me, and then Eleanor called me right after. Mother, I don't know what to think. Eleanor said this man has a criminal record. She said he's a professional who preys on lonely old women. She said you're confused and that Catherine is enabling you because she feels guilty for not visiting more." The cruelty of the lie, so specific and so vicious, took my breath away. They weren't just disagreeing. They were actively trying to poison a 60-year-old truth and assassinate the character of a good man. I felt a surge of anger, but I pushed it down, channeling the calm strength Ms. Reed had advised. "Margaret, my dear," I said, my voice even and gentle, "I am not going to tell you who to believe. That is a decision you must make for yourself. But I will ask you to think. I am your mother. Catherine is your sister. This man, James, is my son. We are not lying to you. If you wish to meet your brother and look into his eyes and make your own judgment, my door is always open. But I will no longer participate in this ugly war of words. The truth is here, in this house, whenever you are brave enough to seek it." I hung up, leaving the choice entirely in her hands. The power was no longer theirs to wield. I was simply offering a truth she could choose to accept or reject. The dragon's response to our lawyer's letter was not legal, but personal. And it was exactly as Jessica had predicted. She learned through a panicked phone call from one of our more sympathetic cousins that Eleanor had summoned an emergency family crisis meeting at her home for the following Sunday. Myself, James, Catherine, Benjamin, and our spouses were explicitly not invited. We were to be the topic of the trial, but we were not welcome in the courtroom. "They're doubling down," Jessica said, relaying the news to our small group that evening. "They're telling everyone that James is a dangerous ex-convict and that the rest of us have been brainwashed. They're trying to isolate us, to make us the enemy." We sat in my living room, the threat now clear and present. They were trying to build an army against us, fueled by lies. For a moment, a wave of despair washed over me. How could we fight such poison? It was James who spoke, his voice calm and steady amidst our turmoil. He had been a quiet observer until now, respectful of our family dynamics. But he was the one being slandered, and he would not be a passive victim. "They're painting me as a lie," he said, his gaze clear and direct. "The only way to fight a lie so enormous is with a truth that is simple and irrefutable." He looked at me, then at Catherine and Benjamin. "I believe the time has come for science to have its say. I would like to propose we have a formal DNA test." The room went silent. A DNA test. It was so simple, so logical, so completely devastating to their entire argument. Their claims of a con man and a fraudulent claim would evaporate in the face of a 99.9% match. It was the ultimate weapon of truth. Catherine, my practical nurse, slammed her palm on the coffee table. "Of course," she exclaimed. "That's it. It's perfect. I can arrange it through a certified lab the hospital uses. The chain of custody will be impeccable. The results will be legally binding. We can completely neutralize their entire argument." A new energy, sharp and focused, filled the room. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed strategy. This was our path forward. We would let them have their meeting. We would let them spread their venom and build their alliances on a foundation of lies. And we would wait. The next day, Catherine arranged for a mobile phlebotomist to come to the house. In the quiet of my living room, I sat beside James, my firstborn, and we both extended our arms. The small, sharp prick of the needle was nothing. It was a tiny pain that promised to heal a lifetime of wounds. Benjamin and Catherine had their samples taken as well to establish a sibling link beyond any doubt. The samples were sealed, labeled, and taken away. Now all we could do was wait. The trap was set. The final piece of evidence was being processed. Ms. Reed advised us on the final move. Once the results were in, she would send a formal letter to every single one of my children, David, Eleanor, Samuel, Margaret, all of them. The letter would invite them to a final family mediation at my home. It would state that irrefutable scientific evidence concerning the identity of James Vance would be presented. And it would make it clear that this was their last chance to resolve this matter with dignity as a family before we pursued our countersuit for defamation and harassment. We had called their bluff. Now we were raising the stakes. As I watched the courier carry away the small, precious box containing our blood, our truth, I felt a strange sense of peace. The end was coming. And this time, it would be an ending of our own making. The 2 weeks we waited for the DNA results felt like a lifetime. It was a period of forced calm, a deep breath before a plunge into icy water. David and Eleanor's crisis meeting had taken place, and the reports that trickled back to us through sympathetic cousins were as ugly as we had feared. The lies had been cemented. James was a predator, I was his senile victim, and Catherine and Benjamin were traitors to the family. A line had been drawn, and nearly all of my children had been herded to the other side out of fear and long-practiced obedience. Then, one Thursday morning, a courier delivered a thick, sealed envelope from the lab. My true family was gathered in the living room. James, my 3 loyal children, and my 2 stalwart daughters-in-law. All conversation ceased as Catherine took the envelope, her hands surprisingly steady. She slid it open with a kitchen knife and pulled out a sheaf of papers filled with charts and scientific jargon. She read silently for a moment, her eyes scanning the pages. And then she looked up, a slow, beautiful, beatific smile spreading across her face. "Well," she said, her voice brimming with triumphant emotion. "Science, it seems, has a heart. The probability of maternal relationship between Mary Vance and James Thomas Albright is 99.9999%. She turned a page. "And the probability that Benjamin and I share a paternal genetic line but not a maternal one with James is, well, it's a statistical certainty. Hello, big brother." The breath I had been holding for 60 years escaped me in a long, shuddering sob of pure, unadulterated relief. It was real. It was true. It was fact. James closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. We were no longer petitioners asking to be believed. We were the bearers of an undeniable truth. Ms. Reed's letter went out the next day. It was a masterwork of professional restraint and barely concealed threat. It requested the presence of all 10 of my children at a final mediation at my home the following Saturday. It stated that conclusive scientific evidence regarding my relationship with Mr. James Albright would be presented, and that this would be their only opportunity to resolve the matter with dignity before our countersuit for defamation proceeded. The day of the meeting, my house was a fortress of quiet strength. Ms. Reed sat in a stately armchair, a bastion of legal calm. My allies and I were seated together on one side of the room. We were a family. One by one, the others arrived. They were not a family. They were a fractured, nervous pack. David and Eleanor entered with an air of arrogant defiance, their lawyers flanking them like attack dogs. Samuel came with Jessica, but sat apart from her, his face a sullen mask. The rest of my children, including Margaret, filed in, their eyes darting everywhere but at me, their faces etched with confusion and fear. Ms. Reed began, her voice cool and measured. She outlined the events of the past few months, detailing the accusations of fraud and the threats of a conservatorship. Then she stood up. "My client, Mrs. Vance, has endured these attacks with grace," she said. "But the time for accusations is over. The time for facts has begun." She personally handed each of my 10 children a certified, notarized copy of the DNA report. I watched their faces as they read. I saw Margaret's eyes fill with tears of shame. I saw Samuel refuse to even look at the page. I saw Eleanor's perfect composure shatter, her face crumbling as the scientific certainty of the report dismantled her entire narrative of lies. David was the last to break. He scanned the document, his lawyer whispering in his ear, and when he looked up, his face was purple with rage. His last line of defense, So what? He exploded, throwing the report on the coffee table. So he's her son. That doesn't change a thing. He's a stranger, an interloper, and he is a threat to the financial security of this family. This has always been about the inheritance. The ugly, greedy truth was finally laid bare for all to see. And then James, who had been silent all this time, stood up. He was not angry. He was the calmest man in the room. He looked directly at David, with a gaze full of a pity that was more devastating than any anger. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice quiet but resonant, "I have spent my life as a history teacher. I have a home I love, a pension that is more than adequate, and 2 wonderful daughters who are my entire world. I did not come here seeking a father's fortune. I came seeking a mother's story. That is a treasure you clearly cannot comprehend." He reached into his jacket and placed a sheaf of papers on the table, right next to the DNA report. "However, to put your mind at ease, this is a legally binding and irrevocable document, prepared by Ms. Reed. It relinquishes any and all past, present, and future claims I or my descendants may have to the estate of Mary or Arthur Vance. I want nothing from this family. Nothing except perhaps one day the simple human decency of being acknowledged." The room was utterly silent. James's quiet dignity had done what no amount of shouting ever could. It had stripped David of all his power, exposing him as nothing more than a greedy, frightened man fighting a phantom menace. Eleanor simply stared at her hands, a queen whose kingdom had turned to dust. I finally stood up, the matriarch of this broken, beautiful, complicated family. "The truth is now on the table for all to see," I said, my voice clear and strong. "This family as we knew it is over. But a new one, built on honesty, can begin for those who want it. My home and my heart are open to any of you willing to do the hard work of humility and apology. It is open to my son, James, and his family always. For those of you who find the truth too bitter a pill to swallow, I wish you peace. But you will find it elsewhere. A year has passed. It is Thanksgiving. My table is full, but the faces are different. James is here with his daughters Olivia and Sophie, my brilliant, funny granddaughters. Catherine and Benjamin and their families are here. Jessica is here, and beside her sits a much quieter, gentler Samuel, his hand resting on hers. Margaret is here too, her face bright with the relief of having chosen correctly. We are smaller. We are scarred, but we are whole. The empty spaces at the table are not a sign of loss, but a reminder that a family, like a garden, must sometimes be pruned of its sickest branches to allow the healthy ones to thrive. My greatest secret led me to my deepest sorrow, but through it I found a truth more precious than any heirloom. I did not just find a lost son. I found the real beating heart of my family. Thank you, my dear friend, for walking this long, winding road with me. Your presence has been a great comfort. If this story of a family lost and found has moved you, please show it with a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of my life. I wonder, what do you think the future holds for David and Eleanor? Can hearts that have grown so cold ever find their way back to the warmth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone and I cherish our conversations.